All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. As my regular viewers know, I devote a lot of time on this channel to looking back at the history of New Jersey underground music, specifically from the 80s and 90s. And quite frankly, any work I do on this channel in that area would have been shamefully incomplete without focusing on the guests I have for this conversation. I cannot be happier and more excited to welcome various members of not only one of my favorite bands from New Jersey, but one of my biggest influences as a musician, bar none. It's my pleasure to welcome Johnny, Sam, Robert, Scott, and Chris from the great Sticks and Stones. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
Joe.
for having us.
Thank you for that way too kind introduction too.
No,
If you wanted us to be relaxed, that was not the way to do it. So
well, it's absolutely true, and I'll definitely get into that more. But I know this has taken some time to put together. We've been chatting on and off in various directions for a few months now to coordinate this. First and foremost, I want to give a shout out to Mr. Pete Tabbitt from Vision, who initially laid the foundation for this conversation to take
Oh,
place.
wow.
So thank you, Pete. All the best to you. So I've got five former members of the band Sticks and Stones. For those who are unfamiliar with the band, the group existed, we'll just say late 80s to mid 90s, and we'll dive a bit further into all of that. But first and foremost, I have five of you here. I know, Sam, you're joining us from Japan at the moment, so I really appreciate that. How long has it been since the five of you have been in such close quarters, we'll say?
I say the last gig we did, no?
Pete's
Yeah,
funeral.
that's what I was thinking. Oh, that's true
Right?
too.
Four of us, other than Sam, who was in Japan. I think we were all at Pete's funeral.
Yeah,
Right? So that's
Oh, right.
correct.
Right.
2020, 2021,
Mhm.
2021.
Well,
So
it's nice to see you all together under much more positive circumstances, certainly. And we'll talk quite a bit about Pete, of course, and his impact not only on the band, but certainly his artistic explorations, before and after, certainly. So to kind of set the table with the history of the band, I know the first demo, the first Sticks and Stones demo was 87. So if my timeline is correct, that kind of puts the band forming 85, 86. Do I have that right?
No, I think
Scott.
it's so. Yeah, I
Well,
mean, me and
Robert.
Scott were in school with Pete, um, who was in a band, Neurotic Impulse. He started going in a different musical direction, split up with that band. They went on to become Vision. So there's another, reference to Vision and Pete Tabbitt. Pete went on to get some people together, of which Scott was one. Um, and I want to say, Scott, help me out. I think that was probably 1987, and I'm assuming the first demo was 1987. They would practice in Scott's garage,
Yeah,
or basically a barn with electricity.
maybe the summer before that school year, whatever. John Gilch was the drummer,
Yeah,
Mm.
original drummer, and Brian Johns was the original singer, right?
yeah.
And
I think that was
and
around 87 that it probably formed because in 1986 I was a freshman in high school and I know Pete was still in Neurotic Impulse.
oh
And
yeah,
then
that makes sense.
yeah, and then the
Whenever
following
Neurotic Impulse died.
yeah, they broke up and split up and went on to do other things. So I think it was around 87.
So 87 is the official start date, and the band formed in the Bridgewater area, correct?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Scott, you're clearly the earliest member of the band who's joining us for this conversation. Um, what can you tell me as far as, the earliest days of Sticks and Stones, as far as influences, what you were hoping to do as a band and some of the initial steps that led to that first recording back in '87?
Well, I think after Neurotic Impulse broke up, Pete wanted to do something that was like a little bit less straightforward hardcore that band was, and have more kind of like some more melodic stuff, like more Clash and the Damned influenced kind of stuff, Psychedelic Furs, and what else? Like I remember like Susie and the Banshees and the Cure was in big influences
TSOL
of
was a big one too, I think, at the
yeah,
time.
TSOL. That's true. Yeah. What else? And the drummer John was really into like goth. He was kind of a goth guy. So just the drum beats originally were a little slower than, I guess, Neurotic Impulse stuff or Plaid Youth stuff. Yeah, and also what's his name? Brian, the singer, was really into like Stiff Little Fingers and like Operation Ivy. He was into like a lot of sort of skinhead punk stuff, not like the bad kind, but he there was a lot of that influences too, coming from him in the early recordings.
Well, one thing that immediately struck me when I first heard Sticks and Stones, and I was telling Johnny before we started recording, it would have been 1990, 1991, is, really by that time, the music was so anthemic. The choruses just stuck in my head. And I had a group of friends who ultimately I started a band with when I was a freshman in high school. Pre-internet, pre-punk explosion on MTV, we were relying on just records we were able to find at the punk store that, my parents would drive me to in those days, And, we'd get your records because we had an interest in Jersey bands. And in a lot of ways, the early Sticks and Stones, and certainly the later sound as well, was kind of like a master class in anthemic songwriting in a lot of ways. That was what really stood out for me with Sticks and Stones. It was melodic. You can sing along to it. It was punk, but I could hear, I dare say, somewhat more mainstream influences as well. The band knew how to write music. It wasn't just bashing away. There was actual great care being put into the music, obviously. How were the songs generally handled, the songwriting in the band during that time? Let's say the first couple of years, when the Inner Revolt era going into Storm Coming era, you know, uh, was it an equal contribution amongst all of you in the band at that time, or was it, really, Pete sort of steering the ship in that way?
Was that your time, Mike? What the time was that we're talking about?
I was a fan, and I was hanging around, and I was I was at the shows, and Pete and I knew each other since we were 12, so I was around, and I was at, like, for example, I was at Chris's audition,
Oh
but
yeah,
I wasn't.
I always felt like you were in the band like pretty much from the beginning, like at least from the second, like did you play on Storm Coming and Inner Revolt?
I came in. The first thing I did for the band was the artwork for Storm Coming, and then shortly thereafter, I was in the band, right? So I was in the band around 91 or something, but Storm Coming was out, I believe, at that point. So, I mean, maybe Chris wants to talk
Yeah,
about.
I was going to say I came in for Storm Coming. And that is, but my sense of the question you asked, Joel, is a little twisted because Storm Coming was a really weird transitional time for the band because they had put out In a Revolt, I guess on cassette, right? And then they had put out their 4-song 7-inch, which had become really popular. But then Nigel either left or was kicked out. Brian Johns was left or kicked out. So Pete, at that point, I can say, the songs he brought the storm coming were pretty much written. I think we wrote the instrumental that was like an extra called Means, showed up on a comp, I think. But the rest of the songs were already written, and my sense was it was Pete's music. Generally, his lyrics, Brian probably contributed some prior. But it was a really weird. There was a lot of he was trying to put together this band. He had some success, so we didn't want to ditch the name. I tried out and became the drummer. He took over vocals. Mm-hmm. Scott who had been a bassist in the band's original, I guess, formation, came back as a keyboardist. But it was a really kind of dodgy proposition at the time for everybody, for Pete and all of us. I mean, I was new, so I was just kind of like happy to come along. But I know for him, and for even like fans of the band, it was a turn. The songs were the same, but they were, the songs had been written before, so they were written in the same time period as some of the other songs, but they immediately took on kind of new flavors. Kind of, you hear the synthesizers that Scott brought in, some other Pete's vocals, and some other things that happened with finalizing those songs to be recorded. I just remember it being a stressful and kind of wild time. But yeah, that was my sense. I mean, after that, we can talk about the later periods later when everybody else joined, Sam and Mike, and the writing. Those guys can weigh in on that. But that's what I remember most about that period of when I joined is just kind of how tenuous the band's existence even was. Was this going to work? Going to record something? Or all the people who liked the old music, which was much more rooted in hardcore, are they going to like keyboards? There was just a lot of discussion, a lot of interest amongst ourselves about that time.
Can I jump in? And I just, the conversation's kind of jarring or stirring up some things. And as you're talking, I'm thinking how, like, I remember my first conversation with Pete. We were in middle school, and we were maybe somewhere in the middle of the year, and his family moved into town. So he was like the new kid dropped into this school. And I was, we were in the lunchroom, me and my friend Dwight. And we were like, who's that new kid? Right. And so we just sort of like, rushed him, like, who are you? And that first conversation was about books and music, right? And a large part of that conversation was about Pete Townshend's solo stuff and David Bowie. And that was the first conversation I ever had with Pete. We were 12 or something like that, right? And when Scott is talking about like some of those influences at the very early point of the band, and then kind of what Chris is talking about, I think one of the defining things, the strength of Sticks and Stones and the weakness of Sticks and Stones was this constant reinvention, right? I mean, you can't even say that every album sounded different. It's like every song, like I said, as you're getting to things like, a theme song, like it's really all over the map. The unifying thing is that there's no unifying thing, and I think that, and that I think eventually leads to us splitting up, which is, I go back to that first conversation. I always think of David Bowie as this guy that is never staying in place. He's never stationary, and that reinvention, and I think that was very important to Pete, right? And I think that this pattern of like whether it's somebody coming and going from the band or not, right? There's this constant reevaluation of what the band is, and this experimentation with how it will sound, and we kind of never really, we never really thought musically about like that we're doing this type of music or that type of music. I think, you know, we were a punk band because of who we are and how we, you know, see things or deal with the world or whatever. But we never ever, I don't think that was ever a defining thing about what we could or couldn't do musically. I don't think we ever felt that there was like, we can't do that. It's not punk. Like that. That was never a conversation, you know. I think that goes to our influences. Like our influences are not that, you know.
We were still gathering them as we were in the band. We would hear a band like Television, and we'd play it for each other, or you know, anything. We weren't fully formed human beings at the time, so new influences would hit us all the time. Pete would play me something from some obscure West Coast hardcore band, and I'd incorporate that. Like I said, I think I played him Television and Tom Verlaine first, and some of the songs start ripping off some licks from Television. So like we weren't fully formed human beings, so we were all ears, and we just kind of were developing as the band was developing. You know?
I think it's a good place in any kind of art. I think having some kind of creative curiosity, you know, I mean, you're going to have your share of disasters, you know, that you never should have made, but I don't think you can make anything good if you don't have that sort of like curiosity about stuff, whether you're going forward or backward or, you know, absorbing what's out there. I think that's a real defining thing about the band.
Yeah, as a listener and as a fan, I would agree with that. One thing that was always really captivating for me when I was younger, first discovering your music, was it certainly fit into what I would say we can call punk. Okay, I can say this is a New Jersey punk band. But it was also sometimes difficult to figure out the source. You know, if you're listening to an Oi band, you know where that's coming from. It wasn't always clear with Sticks and Stones where you guys were coming from. You know, I think, you know, Pete had a very unique, very expressive singing style, which was very unique for certainly New Jersey, but punk at the time, you know. Um, some of the stuff I was listening to back then from your band reminded me almost of like a revved up U2 in a way. You know, the sense of melody and the song structure, you know, and the soaring choruses. You know, not every band was doing that. So it was kind of hard for me to go, okay, you know, it's punk, but it's something else too. You know, and your output was always a little bit of a moving target in that respect, which made it fun. You know, when something new came out, it's like, all right, well, where's it going to go now? You know, as a listener, I wasn't always sure of that. And that was the cool factor, you know. Um, since we're talking about different members and things, I want to mention for the viewer who may not be aware of this, Brian Johns later ended up singing in Nibla Kedbane for a bit. He sang on the second 7-inch, and Larry and Andy have been on the podcast. So I want to make that connection that when those guys talk about Brian, they're talking about Brian Johns, formerly of Sticks and Stones. Um, and this point was brought up before we started recording that there were a lot of members of Sticks and Stones in the band's existence. Um, Out of curiosity, what do you all, having been in it, what do you all account for um, that kind of turnover as the years went on?
Mostly the bassists. You have three of them here. Three of the four here. So you've got almost all of them. Go ahead, guy.
Well, how am I supposed to speak after that? I mean, I would have to take a guess with Larry. I mean, Scott, you might be able to talk to this too. The band had minimal financial success, especially earlier, and you know, I think maybe as you start to get a little older and you maybe have another opportunity and you weigh the options, and I think they probably just moved on, and I don't even know if Larry went on to create another. He was another bassist.
He was on Storm Coming with me.
Yeah, right before Sam. So I don't think it was. I think it was a very heartfelt hobby at the time for a couple of the, and certainly not for Pete. Without doubt, that guy lived it like I've never seen before.
It's a weeding out process because you have to get rid of anyone who has aspirations for success. You know, if you're trying to achieve something
disqualify
with
them.
the band,
yes,
you're out, and it takes time to assess that. You know, if you're someone who's trying to make a buck, get the fuck out.
It was
right?
hard. It was hard, you know, hard living. You know, it was Pete demanded a lot out of you in terms of commitment and rehearsals and touring and doing these basement college tours and stuff that were fun. But you know, you couldn't like get a job, keep a job if you were going to do that, or have any money, or
jobs were frowned upon. I think would be a light statement, except where Johnny X was concerned, which we'll get to him financing the band in heavy format later on.
Well,
you know,
also
like
musical style
I mean,
change.
I know it's not my story to tell, but like, you know, since Sam and Rob are here, you know, the bass duties went from Sam to Rob, and that you know how that happened just kind of illustrates it's a not remarkable story. It's a very, you know, I'll let Sam and Rob tell it. You know, Sam was playing bass in the band. We were booking a short tour, and
Sam,
Go ahead, Sam.
what did you do?
Sam.
What was it? Why did you leave? What was you leaving? I don't even remember the reason why.
I think I got caught in a bad marriage, I said.
Oh, right.
Right. You know, that was very influenced by my ex-wife. By doing what I was doing for fun is, like you said, it's just not, you know, making a life that she wanted to have.
Right.
So she blamed on, you know, me being prioritizing the band, what I like, what I love to do over whatever she had in her vision of
Right.
marriage couple supposed to be. So I did regret afterward, and I hated to see Rob playing the bass on the stage at a city garden. The Halloween show, if you remember.
I had to rewrite the bass lines because I couldn't play what Sam was playing because he was that much better. That's not a joke. I think there were 2 songs I actually had to rewrite the bass line.
I also remember, the way I remember it was also that, like, Sam, you had like a hard time getting work, and you were working at a Japanese company. It was like a Japanese
Was it real estate?
realty, right? And like it was a rare job to find, and it was like to go on tour,
Right.
you have to quit that job, right? And so you were like, I can't leave. I need this job. I can't leave this job, right? And
Right.
that was it. So we were like, well, we need someone to go on the road with us, and so we called Rob, and so I'm just saying, like,
I never had a job, so I was free.
it was a really normal circumstance. It was very normal. Like that was one instance where we had a lineup change, you know, and a lot of times another thing it illustrated is how I didn't know how to play guitar. A lot of, you know, Pete's sensibility was he'd rather have like someone that was a friend join the band and then learn how to play something, then find someone who's
true.
like the best bass player or the best guitar player, or you know, like there were a lot of really good musicians. You know, some of them were his roommates.
Taking the job.
They wouldn't have taken the job. I mean, I also think that's true. I mean, and I mean, I hate to say this, but I don't mean this disrespectfully. Pete was a big personality, and I think, you know, it's a strain. It can get to be a strain when you're. I think, you know, for us, it's when I look back how we meant that shit, you know, and I think every line of the band, however brief or whatever, Like Sticks and Stones was fucking intense. I was like you, Joel. I was a fan. You know, I would sit in the back of the crowd at a Sticks and Stones show and cry. Like I loved them. I loved them. I was obsessed with the band. Like, and I think everyone in the band kind of like brought that intensity of like a sense of a mission, you know, and that's hard to sustain. And when everyone is firing on that intensity, you know, you fucking fight a lot, right? Because it's so important to you, right? It's so important to you that you so desperately don't want to make a mistake. You want this thing to come out. You believe it must be like this, you know, and trying to get everyone on the same page, like that's intense, you know. A lot of what you hear when you're trying to, I think when you're trying to describe how the band sounded on, I think what you're hearing is us not really being on the same page all the time, and but it kind of works, you know. That sort of you put those warring elements together, and it can be a disaster, but sometimes it can also be like fucking awesome, you know. It can be really, you can come up with something really intense, and I think, you know, a lot of it is, it's the culmination of our flaws, but like it's so heartfelt. Like that's, I just think I don't know what it sounds like to people who can actually play instruments. That's not me, but like I just hear the like belief. That's, you know, if I put Sticks and Stones on, like that shit gets by on belief. That's what's holding it up. Faith is holding that thing up, because it's a couple people don't know what the fuck they're doing, you know. And certainly me, right? But I think that's the space in which all these different elements that, you know, gelled, right? Was that sort of belief in the thing, you know, in the thing that we were trying to accomplish, right?
Well, I mean, I would say that came through on the records, you know.
I think it does on the best moments. It's really there.
Yeah. Even on the covers record, which is actually, I got to say, that's my personal favorite, because that was the first one I ever had, was
Oh, no way.
Flowers Can't
You know the
Fail.
story behind that?
I know a little bit about it, but why don't you dive in? Because I think it's a cool story.
Chris, I think this is yours. When you tell that was my first tour with the band. We're talking about Coup Flowers, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have, let me just set it up kind of like, the band is recording Theme Song for Nothing, which is going really slow, right? So we're tracking long time, right? And we're tracking this record, and I happen to be a 12-string guitar owner, and Pete was like, I want some 12-string guitar on this. So that was finally my in. He'd been trying to angle me into the band for a long time. So like, why don't you learn a couple of these songs and we'll record some 12-string, which was like mind blowing to me, to like, you know, record with Sticks and Stones and to enter a band in the studio, where I had never been in a recording studio before. So I was like, ugh. So I learned a few songs, and then that's when Scott quit, right? So
during the recording.
during I think you tracked the album, but then you're like, we were going on the road, or you were going on the road.
Was that at the Looking Glass?
No, that was
I think it's before.
Yeah, that. Oh no, Looking Glass.
Looking Glass.
Oh no, yeah, we tracked at Looking Glass. Yes.
I remember I think I took like acid or mushrooms, and then I couldn't remember how to run the mixing board. Was that same session, or was that a different session?
No, it was that one. No, you were back in the band by then. You quit during the initial. So Joel, we recorded an initial set of songs, and Scott played keyboards on them, and he was in the band. But then he quit. But then we made up, and he came back and recorded us at Philip Glass's Looking Glass Studios in New York, I think, Scott, right? So, And yes, you erased the bass drum track, so I had to play bass drum with
Snare,
like
yeah, yeah, that was cool.
Acid.
acid.
And so I knew a couple songs. There was a tour booked. Wow, this is actually a giant story because the reason we were on that trip was because of Twin Tone. That was the
Right.
purpose of that trip, right? Was to go meet Paul Stark. So that's a whole other layer of the story. But and so Pete was just like, well, you already know a few songs. You just learn a few more in the van on the way to our first show, and you can kind of fill it out, right? Because the keyboard
Yeah,
is
you weren't
on.
like an official member yet. You were
No,
like
I
back.
felt like I should not stand on the stage. Remember that period?
Right, right. Yeah, but we lost Scott and we needed to fill in the sound, so it made sense.
So your which I remember it being your idea, the way the parameters for Coop Flowers, believe I think was you.
Yeah, he was.
Okay, so go ahead.
Well, honestly, you talk about the recording or the
Yeah, I'm talking about the reasoning for why Coop Flowers was recorded the way it was recorded.
because it was a silly thing. I didn't have an appreciation for putting out records, I think. And I think it was I think it was like a funny idea. Like, hey, we'll do this throwaway. And we literally, like, at least one of the songs, I think we learned on the way there. Like, they weren't well practiced, Joel. They were things we either played around with. And in a way, it was just, yeah, I guess it was my idea, but I feel like, wow, I was so young and dumb. Didn't realize that you don't casually kind of like put out a record and just kind of like, yeah, here's a record. Yeah, okay, we learned the song, and we really had our hopes and dreams pinned on theme song, and it was taking years. And in fact, I think even between those other two sessions, there was a third recording session that got thrown in the garbage.
Skylab.
Skylab Studios. So we just couldn't
That
get
rings
it
a bell.
done. We were changing. Like we weren't even really, we didn't sound the same at the end by the vinyl session as we did at the beginning. So, but we had our hopes and dreams, and it was about, and then it got delayed by Twin Dome Distributing, but Skeen Records, who I guess was a subsidiary at that point of Twin Tone Distribution. So we thought we'd just put out the 7-inch, and it'll kind of be a little teaser. It'll be just a little appetizer, and then the record just didn't come out for like another year. And when we
The
started
joke.
reading reviews, my initial reaction was like, why are they taking this seriously? And the answer is, well, you put it out. You put out a
The
record.
joke was that theme song was this thing we were laboring over, and it was this 24-track studio, and we were just doing overdubs and experimenting and using didgeridoos, and just like it was crazy, right? And so it seemed to us to be very elaborate, right? And so with this, it was an 8-track digital studio, and the way I remember it, Chris decided, let's make the opposite of theme song so that it's 8 tracks, first takes only,
Almost all first
no overdubs, right? So it's virtually unrehearsed. There's no repairs, right? There's no overdubs. And the idea was, this thing's going to come out and it's going to be like a mess, right? And then immediately after, theme song will come out and it's going to have this polish. And people are going to be like, whoa, what? That's weird. And instead, this came out and the theme song got delayed by like a year. So like everyone was reviewing Coop Flowers, like, what happened to this band?
I'll tell you though, hand on heart, I adore that record. That was my introduction, and because I know they're watching, and we've been talking about Sticks and Stones for over 30 years. Dave and Jeremy, how many times did we play that record? I mean, we got so much out of that era of your band, and specifically to that Coop Flowers record, the Atlantic City cover. I can't listen to Springsteen's original over yours. I prefer yours totally. The
That's
way
on there because I didn't know any of the songs that the band had decided to record in that session. So I was kind of like, like, oh, I'm not gonna be on this. So I was like, can we do something that I can play, right? And like that was just a song I would play like in the van while we were driving. So well, let's do that. And then I think the vocal thing with that was that Pete did know the lyrics. So I was like, okay, well, I'll put in a scratch track so that you can sing along with my lyrics. You can sing along with me, and then we'll erase my track, right? That's what we meant to do. And then that guy who was engineering the record, he was like, why don't you mix them together and leave them? And so that's how that ended up being on there. I was like, can we do something that I play?
Yeah. Yeah. But seriously, I love that record. If I were to make a list of like the 20 most impactful Jersey records in my history, I'll probably do that someday. I'll certainly include that record. I know it's not the
Awesome.
definitive Sticks and Stones record, because it's mostly other people's material. But there's just something about that record. It just hit at the right time for us when we were looking for inspiration. And Pete's voice knocked us out, first and foremost. I mean, that's what it was about him. That guy, A, he could sing, and B, when you listen to him, to my ears, I knew that guy was the real thing and he believed it. We've all seen bands that we know they're, you know, like going through paint by numbers, even if it's a punk band, especially if it's like a band for hire, like a corporate event band or something. You always know when it's not what the guy wants to do. I never doubted that when I listened to a Sticks and Stones record. Like that guy was singing what he needed to sing, and he was saying what he needed to say. That was
What's an interesting thing on that note is I had a guitar since I was in grade school. I took like those kind of lessons that kids take when, at that age. And then I stopped playing for many years, but like I kind of always had a guitar around. Pete did not. Pete was not, he wasn't a kid who took music lessons after school or through school or at school. You know what I mean? So like, we knew each other since we were kids, but we would also kind of like, he went to a different high school that I went to, for example. And like, you would just kind of lose track of each other for a year, you weren't like not talking, but you got your school that you're going with your friends and I'm here with my friends, you just lose track of each other. And then like after a year, we'd be like, hey, what's up? How you doing? Right. And like, I literally lost track of Pete for like a year. And then when I saw him again, he was transformed. He was early Sticks and Stones Pete all of a sudden, and he could play guitar really well. And it was like, at the time I was like, it's been a year. Like, how did this happen? Like, how can you do that? Like, it's like he sold his soul to the devil or something, because all of a sudden
It was
out of
faith, like you
nowhere,
said. It was just like, belief.
yeah. It's weird, right? But it came out of nowhere. He could suddenly play guitar that well.
That's how he played clarinet and spoke German too. He had just faith that he could do it.
Yeah, the German.
so.
Joel,
Yeah,
I don't know if we're painting a real a timeline that anyone's going to be able to like make out here. I don't know if that was your intent.
well, the funny thing is, I was doing a bit of research, prior to this conversation. You guys don't really seem to have much of a timeline. It's a funny thing with Sticks and Stones, but to give people somewhat of a cohesive way forward. So the album comes out in '94. Theme Song for Nothing, I believe. I believe that was 94, 93, 94.
Did
What
it?
was
I
it?
thought it came out, was it 92? 93. It didn't come out in 94. That's when we went to Europe. It didn't come out because that's when Optimist Club came out, right?
Oh, that's a good point.
Maybe a little bit before, Joel. Maybe like 93, 92, 93, maybe 93.
So the lineups sort of gets a little bit more cohesive. Rob, you're in the band at that point.
Yep.
You mentioned Europe, and I know obviously we just talked about Coop Flowers and going out to the Midwest for that. I asked this question of the PED guys because it was always kind of fascinating to me. Um, I was late teens when the internet kind of started, but I was still reading Maximum Rock and Roll and Book Your Own Effing Life and stuff like that to find gigs. I mean, now it's totally different to get things moving forward, but you were one of those bands who were in that era where, there was no internet, there was no event pages, there was none of this stuff that we're doing. So, how does a band that starts in Bridgewater, you know, essentially running on its own steam, end up touring Europe? I mean, what were some of the logistics that led to not only touring in general, but getting yourselves overseas with this thing at that point in time?
Our U.S. tours were mostly Pete using Book Your Own Life.
Mhm.
He was working at Reconstruction Records in New York, which was kind of like this crossroads. Reconstruction Records was a shop on like 6th Street, or I'm probably getting that wrong, with something like that. And they had strong ties with ABC No Rio, which was a squat on Rivington Street. And so the two things together was sort of like this crossroads of bands from everywhere, right? And so that connection was important to getting us out of New Brunswick and getting us into New York, and from there, kind of like making contact with other traveling bands and starting to meet up with them in their hometown and stuff like that. So between that and Maximum Rock and Roll, Book Your Own Life, like Pete really, at that era, that was Pete, like really booking the shows. And then Theme Song was kind of making its way around, and Europe came together because this guy Goliath, who was he was like a punk organizer. He would rent bands equipment and book tours for them. He's from Germany, and he was on vacation in Europe somewhere with his fiance, and they found the Sticks and Stones. They found Theme Song in a record store while traveling, and they were like, "Oh my fucking god, we got to bring these guys to Europe." That's how Europe happened, and he tracked us down and got in touch with Pete, and they're like, "We want to bring you to Europe." That's how that happened.
Well, Pete had run into Karsten, though, right?
That's how I remember the story. I don't know. Karsten, the way I understood it was that the way I remember it, right? I may be wrong. The way I remember it was that Goalie was kind of, that had been his job, right? And he was kind of getting out of parts of the business. He didn't want to deal with the bands. He only wanted to rent the equipment. So he brought in Detlef, right? And it was through Goalie stepping back. Karsten put the record out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I don't remember how Karsten comes in, to be honest. I don't remember.
Well, Karsten came first, right? Because we demoed. We didn't. I don't know if we ever. I think Skeen the label that put out Theme Song had faded away. So we were like floundering, but like back then, just look for anybody who give you some money to record. And we had done a demo, and Pete had run into Karsten somewhere. So the German connection, I think, began with the funding for the recording. We gave him like a 5-song demo. He's like, I think I can scrape up enough money to put out a whole album. So that was why Optimist Club wound up having some odds and ends on it. But I'm wondering if Karsten and Goalie didn't have some kind of connection as well. Goalie, I remember your story about him liking Theme Song, but Karsten and the German connection started because we were like, well, okay, a German label wants to put out a record. Maybe we'll do it as an EP, and those will be starter songs for the next album, which never happened, right? But so it did wind up being a full length, but that was our initial connection to Germany. I think Pete had been to Germany too.
I'm remembering something else too. My God, Joel, this is so sloppy. You know what? Also, I'm remembering But Alive.
But
Remember But Alive?
Yeah.
But Alive. So, but Alive was a a German punk band, a really good German punk band. They're very popular in Germany, and maybe that was the connection. I don't know. I think a couple streams just kind of came together somehow to like,
Yeah.
you know, someone who wanted to do a European release, which ended up being our second album, and another guy involved in bringing American bands to Europe who fell in love with our first record and wanted to bring us over there, and the two things kind of collided in a way that Pete probably could have shed some light on that, but he's not here to do that. So I don't remember. And so we ended up doing that, and it was kind of awesome and also kind of a disaster, and that, which is very sticks and stones. But yeah, I mean, that tour was very weird. Great shows, but also a kind of a tour. It just started to collapse. The booking started to collapse towards the end. So, you know, it was a great experience and a lot of great shows. And then towards the end, it just was like, started to.
It was a problem with all our tours back then, Joe. It was tough when things would just, you'd be out there on your own, 2,000 miles from home.
Yeah.
$35 and the show gets canceled because, you know, someone's mom said you can't do it that night.
Yeah, sleep in the post office. Sleep in the post office vestibule.
Yeah. So it was a rough go for bands. If you weren't well managed, which we weren't, and you rode along on the you know, it was a network, but it was loose. It was a loose network, and it was tough. It was tough.
Well, you know, I remember that era, you know, because now we're kind of in the mid 90s, you know, and there was definitely a sense, 93, 94, that, you know, certain styles of punk rock and underground music were gonna break, you know. You had obviously Green Day being the biggest example of that era, but you had like Epitaph was doing other stuff too, and you know, I think Rancid's first album was out at that point, you know, so there was stuff kind of happening that was bigger than say, you know, a band you'd read about in MRR. You know, like you just got a sense that this thing was going to get bigger and bigger. But that's when, at least from my perspective, because I was getting your records, I was following what you're doing, Sticks and Stones kind of fell off the map at that point. And
well, we broke up in Berlin
at exactly the wrong time, because to your point, Joel, I don't think people, I try to explain this, and I don't think people remember how uncool punk was in the late 80s and early 90s. It was really not cool to do traditional punk, Clash, Jam, Stiff Little Finger influenced stuff. Hardcore was really huge, especially East Coast, and funk bands had kind of risen up, and you know, there was an alternative thing, but in punk, in the hardcore, it was not cool. I remember when Storm Coming came out, how not cool it was to do that kind. There was, you know, you were just kind of labeled, you know, you were like the kids wearing the Rush denim jackets in high school that were like 20 years behind the times, you know, like. And then the time you're talking about is this like kind of reblooming of punk. It became very mainstream and got huge. But that gap, probably I'd say really late 80s or into the early 90s, and really Nirvana probably helped, and obviously Green Day and the bands you talked about. And it was so not cool to be to have traditional punk elements to your music. It really wasn't a thing, you know.
at that point. You know, just before when we went to Europe, I was doing a lot of the booking. I had taken over a lot of the booking, and so we went to Europe and came back, and people had my number, but people would call me at this point. So I, like, when we came back from Europe, this is probably, you see my memory is not good, so this is probably inaccurate, but I want to say out of the bands that we were really tight with, right, like bands like Lifetime, the Bouncing Souls, I think we were the first to go to Europe, weren't we? That's what I think. I could be wrong. It doesn't really matter, but there was some real, when we came, no one knows how bad your tour was, right? When we came back, there was some real excitement, like, holy shit, Sticks and Stones went to Europe. And
Yeah,
like,
that is.
we got like, I'm right? We were
Yeah,
the first, right?
yeah.
So we got crazy offers. We had label interest. We had people wanted to tour with us. We had a lot of local show calls, and I was like, I'll get back to you, because in my mind we had broken up, but I didn't really, there's always this kind of like slightly open door, that like, well, maybe we didn't. I don't know. Did we? I don't know. So,
I remember getting into writing different music as well. More his punk cabaret that became the World Inferno Friendship Society. There were things that were starting there musically for sure. He already had the name. I know that. I remember him. It wasn't a band name necessarily, but it was like this little concept thing that, as the artist that he was always scribbling things down and concepts and things that sounded good together. So I wasn't surprised when that had happened. I felt it was, and I had only been in the band maybe 2 years, I think, total, possibly. But I was like that. Well, I felt like that's that. I could just, from Pete solely, I felt like he had started to evolve.
I can speak to that a little bit, and maybe if Scott, I don't know if Scott's still with us, but then maybe Scott can jump in with that. But like, also
I'm here. I just gotta turn the light on. Hey guys.
Yeah. No worries. I think I want to say it was probably just before we went to Europe. Pete and I were on the subway, and we were talking about the band, and you could tell. So Pete had been working the door at this club called the Continental, which was kind of like our home in New York. We didn't play CBs. We played the Continental all the time. And then Pete started working there. And this is my speculation. This is me, right? But my feeling is, if you're at the Continental and you're working several nights a week, and it's one of these, East Village bars that plays like, it's going to have like 5, 6 or more bands every night, rock bands grinding away, right? I think it wore him out, having to be there listening to that, and inevitably comparing us to whoever was on the stage, and like processing, like wanting, like the desire to get as far away from that as possible, right? And I think that was what was going on with him. And again, that's why I wasted so much of our time talking about that conversation I had with him when he was 12, because it's an amazing first scene, when the first conversation you have with someone is Bowie. And, if you conceive of Bowie as a guy who reinvents himself, and then you fast forward to this late stage of the band where we've made a couple records and we're playing and we're touring and stuff, and you could really see him wanting to bust out of the thing we had made, and we were, that was definitely happening, right? I think. And then we were on the subway, and he was kind of expressing this, like he was like, I really want to. He said, I want to do something more theatrical, which this was the exact wrong thing to say to me, right? And I was like, and he says, I think we should change the name of the band, because I think it's the only way to break with what we're doing is to change the name, right? As long as we're Sticks and Stones, we're gonna be kind of stuck with what we've made. And I was like, well, what would the name be? And he said, World Inferno Friendship Society. And I said, that will never happen. And I think therein laid, the groundwork for the wheels to come off this thing, because we were like two immovable objects, like looking back, I would, again, I have to speculate, right? I have to speak for him, unfortunately. And I think his desire was coming from that. He's a restless spirit that wants to, he can't be pinned down. He's got a kind of creative person, and he's got to kind of move with that and follow that, right? And as I said, like, I'm the fan, I'm the super fan who ended up in the band, right? And I would verbalize that my job in the band was to make the band what I imagined it was from the audience, and to ensure that it was that, right? And therein lay every argument Pete and I ever had about the band, right? Was my desire to, if the thing I thought Sticks and Stones was from the audience was a projection, to make it real, right? And protect that and preserve that kind of in amber. And Pete's desire was not to break that, was to break that and to do something else, you know. So that was the you know, the groundwork, at least for the two of us. I mean, you know, anyone else could have stayed, but like, it was definitely the recipe for us to butt heads, you know. And then you know, he and Scott, you know, were started. I created a situation where he couldn't do what he was imagining, and so he went looking for a way to do that. And then I think he and Scott and maybe some other people started working together on what became. It was him and Scott, right? It was you and, right, Scott? It was you and Pete.
Well,
first.
I initially, but then this is a podcast about Sticks and Stones, not World Inferno. But that's basically, I guess, when he before I quit that a few times more. But yeah, he always wanted to be able to do whatever he wanted to do creatively, unhindered, or you know, with no resistance, or you could take a hike, you know.
Right.
So that I think inevitably is part of the reason of all the turnaround in both bands really over the years is just that he was the force behind it, and you just hold on as long as you can, and then you lose your grip at some point, you know.
Yeah.
There was always an element of putting a thumb in the eye from Pete. And I think like World Inferno transition from Sticks and Stones was the ultimate thumb in the eye. And like, whether it's the songs we decided to put on Coop Flowers, changes of direction, I don't know, the band didn't have a death wish, but we definitely had a thumb in the eye kind of attitude about it. And sometimes cut off our own paths to success, I think, in some ways.
Yeah.
And
Self-sabotage.
definitely like a recurring theme on that all the way through the whole lifetime of the band.
You know, and certainly, you know, Pete or Jack Terrycloth, you know, had a great run with World Inferno, you know, and certainly built a fantastic fan base for himself in that act. But this wasn't really the end of Sticks and Stones, because I know there have been a couple of times in subsequent years things had come back around again. I know it was, I believe, 2003 was the big compilation, The Strife and Times, Sticks and Stones, which is a great retrospective. And anybody watching this video, dig up the old vinyl if you can find it. But if you need a starting point, I would say that that compilation is a great place to go. Um, and you know, 2003, quite a few years after the fact. How did that compilation come to be at that point?
Was that through Bouncing Souls, through Chunks Records?
Yeah, but I'm trying to think how it started. So our friends, Bouncing Souls, financed, put it out on their label. I think we reunited for a show first. I think we did. We might have done Holomass first.
I don't remember which was first.
Anyway,
he was also very much in touch with Kate, who was in charge of Chunks Records, which was the Bouncing Soul label. So they were always in touch, and I think that it all kind of collided at the same time, most likely. I would have to assume.
Pete Steinkoff was my brother-in-law at the time. He and I talked through some of this too. At probably exactly the same time, I'm thinking. It all kind of just came together.
Yeah.
Zach Kaplan was working at Chunksa. He was a huge Sticks and Stones fan. I think there was, the Souls family, the Bouncing Souls family, were always like the hugest Sticks and Stones supporters. They put out the Cynical EP, right? They would book us, they would take us out and we would do shows together. Like they loved us, they loved us. We were related, we were tied through marriage, we were a big kind of dysfunctional family. And so the Souls always really supported us. And, Zach was a huge fan. Kate was always a huge supporter of Sticks and Stones. And like Rob and Chris are saying, I think there was sort of this like, hey, this stuff is all out of print. We ought to make this comp. And I don't think it came from us though. I think it came from Chunksa. So it was like Kate and Zach and maybe Souls and stuff.
I think we grew it. I think we, in typical Sticks and Stones fashion, I think we took like what was a more minor idea and like blew it up, like put everything on. Like I think it was supposed to be a shorter something of. I don't think it was like a full,
Oh, maybe
everything.
That would be us.
It just kept growing legs, and we could find more tapes. So it kept costing more. They'll tell you about that. Yeah, that was it was a little bit more minor project, Joe, but yeah, like in typical fashion, we wanted to do it. And I know Pete felt the same. Well, put whatever, if we're gonna do it all.
But we had been out of touch we've been mostly out of touch for a long time. Yeah. It sounds crazy to me now. It sounds incorrect, but I feel like I didn't talk to Pete for like 10 years.
Well, that's what we got back from Europe. Yeah, probably eight.
And I have what I think is a really funny story. Like I hadn't seen or talked to Pete in many, many, many years, and I had met my girlfriend Lisa, who's sitting she's right behind me. You're going to see her shoulder in the shot every couple of times. But so I had met Lisa, and she lived in Brooklyn, and I lived on the Lower East Side. And I went to her apartment. Like we hadn't known each other that long. I went to her apartment, and it was like this building in Williamsburg where you would go to the back of the apartment and you would look out the back window and you would look into the interior of the block, right? And it's just this kind of like fucking wasteland where you see the backs of the building on the other street, that it's all like crap down there. So like, I'm just sort of like in this place for the first time, and I'm scoping the apartment out, and I'm looking out the back window, and I can see across the block to the building on the far side of the block. And there's a window facing, and she's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I'm just looking out the window." And I was like, "Oh, there's a dude over there. Oh shit, I think there's a dude getting out of the shower over there." And then I'm like, it's Pete. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, I really, again, I'm not sure that this time is accurate, but I feel like that's how I saw him for the first time after like 10 years. I was like, fuck. And then I walked around and was like, oh, it must be this building, and I figured out where he lives, and we kind of got back in touch with each other. And that was around the time that, the compilation came up, and I don't really remember the order of events, but World Inferno had their big Halloween show. They were playing this place called The Hook in Red Hook, and Pete contacted everyone and said, I had this idea. What if, the World Inferno plays this set and walks off like we're going to take a break before the encore, and instead of World Inferno coming out for the encore, Sticks and Stones will come out for the encore. And we were like, yes, cool, and then we rehearsed and we did that. It was a lot of fun, and I think it left us with like, we should do this again, and and then we just kind of kept doing that.
Putting together the compilation took a long time. There was a lot of grabbing original tapes and masters and I remember how many, I don't know how, I have probably 8 different versions of mastering to get through, because a lot of it was crusty and old Joel. So and Pete was very, very critical. So it was we stayed in touch because of that, because of all the contents of it and sequencing and all that kind of brought us, we were working on something together. It was just a really fun, cool time. I think we were all, like Mike said, like almost 10 years older. I think we really enjoyed each other's company, and working together on something was pretty cool, and we were kind of getting props we felt like we never really got. There seemed to be more appreciation. There seemed to be like, wow, people really seem interested, especially after the Hook show. And I think a year later, we did our own show there, a full show, and that got a lot of interest, and the place was packed. And we were kind of like, let's enjoy this a little bit, and it was a fun time. It really was.
I started saying, pro tip to the younger bands: break up as soon as possible and get to those reunion shows. That's how it's done, kids. But yeah, it's funny, by not playing for so long, by not being around to disprove the myth that had crept up that we were a band worth seeing, we actually became more popular by not playing. And so when we did a few, those first few reunion shows, those were good shows.
But you notice that difference with the internet. All these kids and their daddies, they showed up together. They knew the lyrics of our songs, which never happened in our original shows. So that was a big surprise for us.
Yeah, those were cool shows.
Oh, loved them. Every single one of them.
Yeah.
When was the last time Sticks and Stones played officially?
2017.
17, yeah. One's in Brooklyn, one in Brooklyn and one in Jersey. Was it one in Jersey, right?
Asbury Park, yeah, and a show in Brooklyn.
Who was the lineup for that show? Sam, were you on bass for that?
Yes, that was my going away kind of gig. Well, leaving the country.
It was the theme song for Nothing lineup, which had never happened, because Scott never did any of this. Scott's too successful.
Didn't I have to beg him to play that? I believe I begged Scott, please.
I think you didn't give me a choice. I definitely didn't have a choice.
Scott said we had to each individually beg. That's how we got Scott to play that
Oh my
show.
God, it was so much fun, though. Honestly, that was so much fun. I get what you guys are saying about doing the reunion. That's the best part, The actual original time shows, it was a lot of suffering, but there was no suffering during that. Maybe just a tiny bit of suffering, but totally manageable if they could all be reunion shows.
And then Pete and I did play together after that. We did an Asbury Park benefit after that, just the two of us. That was the last time I saw Pete.
I know sometime within this time frame, unless I'm mistaken, I think it was prior to Pete passing away, the demo from '87 was put out on vinyl.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
It might have been Psychic Volt, but I could be wrong about that.
So that was put out, and I know just in the last couple of years the catalog has been reissued digitally, correct? So that stuff is out there again.
Yeah, it's like watching your grandpa try and change the clock on the microwave. Us getting that shit online, holy crap. And we didn't. In fact, we had to get sorry, I forgot her name, but we had to get Scott's intern to finally just do it for us. Move, Grandpa, I'll do it. That's kind of what happened. But yes, we did
It's
did
totally
eventually.
annoying to do it, and there's like it's like for like literally like $5 a year. So none of us wanted to be bothered to put in like 10 hours worth of work to
Yeah,
find all the right files, but we got it done just to get it done, and it's not, obviously it was never about the money, but it's good that people can stream it and hear it
right,
online, buy it if they want to,
right.
and share it, whatnot.
Yeah.
So, so what was put out there for streaming? Would it be the compilation, or is there other stuff as well that's been put out there?
Uh, the Strife and Times is out there. Theme song is out there. Optimus Club, Coop, Storm Coming.
Great.
And I don't know if 1987 came out streaming. I don't remember if that's
Some of it was on like on Strife and
yeah.
Times.
Right.
I don't know if it came out on its own. I don't know.
I'm a proud Luddite. I don't do the streaming thing, so that's why I had to ask because, it's just never been my thing. Somewhere. Oh, here we go. Here's my micro cassette recorder. So that tells you
Nice.
how I am. I'm barely surviving on YouTube. I don't even know how I figured out Zoom well enough to do an interview. So, but all that said, it's wonderful that stuff is available for streaming.
Yeah.
And anyone who's watching this video who's new to Sticks and Stones, boy, do you have a great time ahead of you, man. This is great classic music that's worth checking out, especially if you're a fan of, Pete's later work and want a reference to what came before. Obviously, that this is a good place to check out, and just great records, man. And I'm really happy
Thanks.
that 2025 this stuff is accessible and people can get into it because I think it's absolutely music that's worth holding on to and it's worth existing now. Um, which kind of leads me to a question. I don't know if it's going to be the easiest or the most difficult for you all, but I do want to get all of your perspectives on this. Considering how varied the Sticks and Stones discography is, um, if each of you could give me a record, perhaps that you would say, if someone came to you, minus the compilation, if someone came up to you and said, what was your band about? From any era, whether or not you were in the band at the time or what have you, what would you say would be the definitive Sticks and Stones release that you would share with that person?
Theme song for nothing. That's that's
Same.
that's that's the one that blew me away initially because I had been through all the garage practices. I'd been through the demo tapes. I think I had even done a couple demos with Pete in our basement with a 4-track recorder. So I knew what poor quality was, and that wasn't it. That was, and I think Scott had a large amount to do with that in the engineering, right?
I don't remember which one that became, but I don't remember which session that was, but I think that was definitely the most widely loved and the sort of the apex of the band, though I would agree with you on that.
Especially with how
In terms
music sounded at that time as well.
Right.
I thought it was pretty incredible.
How about you,
Yeah,
John?
it's unanimous. It's unanimous. Oh yeah, I said ditto. Theme song. Yeah, absolutely. Theme song.
Chris, Sam, same feeling?
It's
Uh,
definitely. Go ahead.
no, go ahead, Sam. You answer.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Theme song. I mean, originally it was called Saint Jude's Day. We didn't talk about that today, um, but it literally took us years to complete. In the meantime, we didn't think it was never gonna come out. Some points. So it does capture I don't know, the transformation of the band, musically, mentally, I guess. It kind of all compacted in that album, I believe. So my favorite.
Cool.
Yeah, I agree. It took so long to took so long to make that you can literally hear the band changing from the beginning. Not even, and of course we screwed up the sequence, but especially on the compilation, you hear this progression. I think my favorite time was the latter part of that and the beginning of the Optimist Club songs, where it seemed like we were kind of getting better at, just kind of like writing and being a little more elaborate. And but yeah, theme song, you definitely hear the whole, you hear it, you hear change audibly, in people and in the band.
Excellent, excellent. And to kind of keep things or bring things rather up to the present tense, what can you all tell us about what you're doing now? Are you all active in music, or have you been primarily doing other pursuits these days?
Scott, you're still involved with music. Is Scott the only one who's involved with music in a professional way?
I
Very
am. I'm.
involved in
Um, I like record studio upstate. I do engineering stuff on other people's projects. I'm doing a project right now, which I'm excited about with Yuli, who replaced me in World Inferno. Uh, and so we were never in the band at the same time, but now we are doing a thing together, which is super cool, full circle kind of thing.
Cool.
Excellent, excellent.
I'm a chef and I do some painting, and that's kind of it. I live down by Asbury Park, so I'm still hanging out with all the Bouncing Soul guys and same
Nice.
tight knit community from high school, basically.
I'm a cartoonist. I was a, you know, I was doing cartooning even when I was in the band. It's a lot of what funded aspects of the band every so often. And I still do that. I do mostly middle grades and comics. I write and draw comics for kids. That's pretty much what I do. I teach a little. I don't really do any music.
Sam, how about you?
I live in Tokyo. It's been what, 7.5, almost 8 years now. Uh,
Wow.
well, the one of the reason I came back was to actually take care of my mom, which who just passed away last month. So
Oh, I'm sorry, Sam.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry,
yeah,
Sam.
well, thank you guys. But no regrets. That's the reason that I'm here, and so I kind of feel like accomplishment. I came back, left everything in New York City. So, but musically, I actually picked up a piano, teaching myself how to
Nice.
play.
Cool.
So
What do you mean
that's my
you
new
picked up
thing.
a piano? You don't just pick up a piano.
He's
I
strong.
do.
Sam, your
Well,
dad was a
actually,
piano player, wasn't he?
yeah, my dad left me a baby grand,
Oh,
so
yeah.
don't
Oh,
Beautiful.
want it to, throw away a nice, perfectly fine, baby grand piano. But I bought a nice digital one, small one for myself. But yeah, musically nothing professional. It's just my hobby. I still play ukulele. So
Yeah.
how about you, Chris?
I have a regular job. I do have a drum set. I have an
You
electric.
still do in the basement?
I still play, yeah, but I had to switch to an electronic drum set because I raised a family,
Oh,
2 daughters, and I mean, who are now old, but I had to keep it, on the down low audio wise. But yeah, I still play. It's fun. I throw on Sticks and Stone songs and Johnny X songs, and I play right along with them, and I close my eyes. Still to this day.
part of the part of the fun for me was always playing with other people, and specifically these people. And I learned to play. I learned to play guitar in this band, you know. And um, if today I were to pick up a guitar and fiddle, um, most of anything that I did, any of those sensibilities, any of the way that I would make a decision about making a song, it all comes from playing in this band with these people and with Pete. Like my way of playing guitar is based on playing the guitar next to Pete. he's doing that, so I gotta do something else. It's how I learned to play, and like without that, I find I just don't have an impetus to pick up. And I got a guitar right here. I'm sitting at my desk. I got a guitar right here. It's next to my desk. It's next to my desk all the time. But I don't. It's hard to want to pick it up. Missing that element. The thing that made me want to play music was that. Anybody who's in a band knows that, like, that moment where you're in the middle of a song and you don't have to speak to each other. You can, and many times you could not, with us, not be getting along, right? It's best that you don't speak, right? But when you're playing, that just goes away, and there's this high level of just communication happening, that doesn't have anything to do with like relating, with by speaking to each other. And like, this is such an awesome feeling when you're just sort of all creating something that's just weaving in, in and out of what you're all doing. And there's just no other replacement for that. I'm a creative person. I draw, I make art, I write books. And the counterpart to that's a very solitary thing. And so the counterpart of that, of when I was doing that, when I was younger, making comics, and then going to band practice, there's such opposites in a way, where one is very solitary and one is incomplete without the other people. And, since Pete died, I really don't play.
It go back to what we were saying before, Joe. We weren't musicians. We really weren't. We played musical instruments, but the band and what we cared about, what we wanted to stand for, all those things that was what it was. We were a band. Other people are musicians. They're really good at it.
Yeah, we made sound.
They learn to play an instrument, and they go when they apply that trade. It was honestly, being a musician was actually, I'm almost laughing inside saying that. That wasn't the thing. That wasn't us. Like,
I think joining the band, I picked up a bass in
right
6 years, maybe 7 years. And when I had picked up that bass, I just plucked it upwards. I didn't even know how to play that. So you want to you just do it. You figure it out. And if that's not a life lesson, then I don't know what is. Because if you can figure that out and have someone pay for you to get on an airplane and travel Europe and, have some kind of an experience, whatever that is, then that takes some guts, in my opinion. And you got to have some balls, or I don't know, some psychological issues maybe as well. It's just certain, I don't know if it's arrogance or confidence or what, but it's very beneficial from time to time, and I wouldn't have been able to accomplish some of the things I have accomplished without having that sensibility, which started in high school with meeting Pete. 100%.
Pete believed in us. We believed in each other. I didn't believe in myself all that much. Being in the band meant other people believed in me. For fuck's sake. What's wrong with these people? I never took a drum lesson in my life, right? But if Pete believed in you, and he did, it didn't matter. Like I said, the musicianship didn't matter. How much did you care? How much were you committed to what you were doing mattered, and to Rob's point, I think like finding people who believe in you and you believe in each other, is like transformative. I wouldn't have had it on my own. I know it's not my personality.
Yeah, changed my life.
Hey man, it changed mine too, as a listener, truly. I mean, had I not been exposed to you guys when I was 13, 14, I probably wouldn't have been in a band at that age. It was one of those, I want to do that. Man.
Yeah.
My fellow bandmates, we're in northern New Jersey, Sussex County, and where you guys were might as well have been Mars. So, we didn't see the band, but listening to the records and like the way perhaps your generation growing up listening to like, pre-punk like Zeppelin and stuff, that's how we were with your records. Like, oh, Johnny Hex on guitar, he's amazing. So, fast forward 35 years to be in the position I'm in to facilitate this has just been an absolute joy. And I posted on my private Facebook, Johnny, you're on it, but I posted a photo of the Coot Flowers lineup, and I said, my podcast Bands Reunited is so much cooler than VH1's Bands. It's been a real pleasure having you all together. I'm very
Thanks.
happy you all made the time. And as I said, there was a lot of logistics that went into this, and a lot of juggling of things. I mean, Scott, you're in a car right now doing this. So, I
I'm
appreciate,
just, yeah, happy to be here.
yeah, really happy to have
It's
you
really
all.
good to see all you guys. It's nice to see all these faces. Everybody looking
Yeah,
healthy and happy.
I'm glad you all made it. Thanks for
Same
bringing us
here.
together, Joel.
Oh
Oh, it's
yeah.
Yeah. So
my pleasure. And I wish you all, nothing but the very best in what you're doing moving forward. Stay healthy, stay happy. Thank you for the music. Thank you, Pete, for the music. And to the viewer, this stuff is available digitally. And if you dig deep enough, you can probably find some great vinyl as well. So this is a catalog worth diving into. I have many fond memories of this music growing up, and this one is just another fond memory I'm going to have of Sticks and Stones. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Joel.